This is the audio feedback edit copy for the Rogue of Dinas. Copyright 2014, Bruce R. Burns. Recording audio copyright 2016, Bruce R. Burns. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. As the sun set on the last day of my 20th year, I knelt in the penitent's chapel and prayed for my soul. A pair of pages in white robes moved about the chapel, lighting candles. I listened to the sound of the busy fortress echoing dimly through the thick chapel doors while my life was about to change completely. Duke David Cooper, 10th Lord of Grey Mountain, stood next to me in the dying light. He stood like a man who had won fame and honor many times over and accepted that admiration was his due. He barely came up to my shoulders, but something about him made me feel small when I was this close. He didn't need height to look down at me, either. I looked at my father out of the corner of my eyes. Words rolled around the back of my mind. Why did you come, Father? Couldn't you find some business in the duchy to keep you in the north? Did you find something in the past 10 years to make you love me at last, or are you just here for your pride? Would you ride 4 days to Dinas rather than let the world know you made a son you couldn't bring yourself to accept? So many questions, but I knew I'd never ask them. Father broke the silence. Nothing to say, boy? Your vigil doesn't begin until sunset, so you're not under the vow of silence. Are you still ashamed of me? I thought, but what I said was, I'm honored by your presence, Father. I risked a full look at him then, but he didn't look back. He scowled out the window instead. Well, it's not every day that your youngest son turns 21. I turned 20 without you, like every birthday since 11, so why are you here now when you never were before? Besides, Father continued, unaware of my thoughts, the king himself will attend the feast, so will the knight marshal. Marshal Arsenio's own son is your sponsor. No, king or not, Lucas Martinson doesn't have so many friends that he can insult his knight marshal and a loyal duke at the same time. I lowered my eyes. I had my answer. You've come to put on a show. House Cooper must appear strong and united. My father always wanted me to speak up, but the painful facts softened my voice instead. I've been fortunate. Sir Jason has only been a knight for 9 months now, but he's seen my service to Sir Kenneth. He got Sir Kenneth permission to sponsor me. Father snorted. Well, Sir Kenneth knows who spins his silk. He'd be a damned fool to refuse the knight marshal's son. Father saw most things through lenses of rank and position. They tell me you did well in your trials. I did my best. No, you, a squire, took 2nd place in the grand melee. Champion would have honored the duchy more, but you didn't embarrass us. No, Father, I thought. I haven't embarrassed you. I have lied, sneaked, and hidden the most precious things in my life to do it, but I haven't embarrassed you. If that's all I can give you, you'll have it, no matter how much it breaks my heart. Father couldn't hear my thoughts, or I'd have never risked them. He kept boasting to his audience of one. I suppose you've done better than I expected. What with the way you hid behind your mother's skirts as a child? You spent so much time with the jester and actors. Called that damn bard uncle, tumbling and singing around the court. You've come a long way from that prancing dreamer to 2nd place. To think you used to be afraid of swords. I loved swords since I first held one, but you watched every lesson, and I saw my every mistake in your eyes. I loved the sword. It's your disappointment that can destroy me. Mother knew I loved grace and beauty. Did you even try to see? I gave him the answer he could understand instead. A knight of Dinas cannot fear pain. Saints above bear witness that I can stand here while you stab me in the heart with every word. The Duke nodded at the window, never to me. You've learned that lesson well, boy. Master the sword like you mastered your fear, and you'll bring honor to our house after all. Do you think I defeated 98 squires without mastering the sword? But for you, the 7th son of Grey Mountain must be first, or else he fails. He shook his head. "You've won some honor. Why did you choose this chapel? You deserve a bigger one." He meant the family did, of course. I gave him an answer he could understand. "The Penitent's Chapel isn't the largest or the richest, but it's the oldest. Legends say that the saints carved the chapel and the windows from a natural cave. When St. Gavin and St. Martin brought mankind from the heavens, they chose this room to worship. In 7 centuries, most of the rooms in Dinas have been many other things, but this has been a chapel since the dawn of time." Father shot me an approving look. I barely recognized it. "Good choice, then. Show the people how humble you are and win over the religious types." Only someone like Father would see a pretense instead of faith. Never mind that the order guarded the oldest reliquary in the world. The Knights of Andinas started as a religious order, so there are probably a lot more of the fools than at home. Fools like me? I could never tell you the real reason I chose this chapel. It was here, if it was anywhere, that the saints would finally hear my prayers. I had to get out of this conversation. Father's heart would kill me, or I would break and say the words I didn't dare, and that would destroy everything. "The sun is setting, Father. My vigil will start soon." He looked relieved that the conversation was over. I clenched my fists within my robes. Sometimes the only victory I could manage was hiding how much my father hurt me. "Well, then, I'll leave you to your vigil. Saints watch over you." The last was slightly louder. His eyes darted to the quiet acolytes, who would hear his proper religious phrase. He turned and left without waiting for the reply I didn't have. The acolytes finished lighting the candles, bowed to the saints, and closed the door behind them when they left. My vigil had begun. Candlelight turned the stained glass windows into murals of smoky-colored mirrors as darkness stretched across the sky. I knelt on the padded cushion at the railing in front of the altar and stared up at statues of the saints. The busy sounds of the fortress faded behind the door as people wound down their days. The heavy feeling in my limbs remained a long time after Father left the chapel. I looked at the saints, but Father's face frowned down at me. I rubbed my eyes. What had I expected? Did I really think that Father had come all this way because he had a sudden change of heart? Did I think that one tournament or one festival would change who he had been his whole life? But I had hoped for those things. There was some stupid, rock-brained part of me that hoped for that change. He hadn't changed in the 11 years before he dropped me at Andinas, and he hadn't changed in the 10 years since. He was never going to look at me the way he did my brothers, laugh with me as he did them. There was no point to this. I'd hoped like a fool and got hurt like a fool. Why waste any more time on it? I set my gaze back on the saints' statues. I hadn't let Father ruin my time as a page. This was where he had left me, and this was my home. If Father couldn't see me for who I was, then the cats take him. I was here to make my vigil, to stand my watch and pray for my future as a knight of Andinas. I wouldn't let Father ruin that, too. A man's vigil determined his future as a knight. Father was right about one thing. I had tasted success, and I liked it. I would succeed at my vigil and make my way. If I brought honor to the family that didn't want me, then so much the better. If I didn't, then it was no great loss. I had a new family here in the order. I would not fail them, as my family had failed me. I shoved thoughts of Father aside and focused on the vigil. I don't know how long I knelt in prayer before the doors swept open. I turned, irritated, and nearly broke my vigil myself to ask what was so important to interrupt my ritual. Sir Julian Arsenio violated my vigil with a wide grin like he'd just brought me cookies instead of trespassing on one of the most important days of my life. And, in a way, he had. My hindbrain clubbed my thoughts to silence for a moment to appreciate the spectacle uninterrupted. Jason was dark and handsome. He had olive skin and dark brown hair. His eyes reminded me of the forest in moonlight, brown, deep enough to drown in. He was long, lean-limbed, and his simple tunic emphasized a flat stomach and broad shoulders. All the warriors of Dinas were fit, but Jason made the others look ham-boned and clumsy. Young women at court wrote poems about him that wouldn't have made their parents even remotely happy. The other young men scowled and grumbled about it, but his natural charm and good humor made it impossible to hate him for his looks. There was no mystery for me, though. I knew more about Sir Jason Arsenio than anyone at Dinas. Those facts were my personal treasure. Jason sauntered down the aisle like he'd won a victory. The self-sure, cocky such-and-such pulled it off, too. I suppose I could have been jealous. I, the outcast, had the most popular knight of our generation for a friend. I wasn't. There was no competition. Everyone loved Jason. It was impossible not to. But I had something better. Jason waved at the cushion I knelt on. "There's no need to rise to greet me. You're supposed to be deep in contemplation on your vigil. It's very serious business. There's even a guard." I raised an eyebrow and shot a pointed look at the door. I couldn't see the knight in charge of the guard, but he couldn't be too far away. Whatever knight they put in charge of my vigil would overhear everything. Jason held up a hand. "Oh, I don't need to leave just because you can't talk. I'm a wonderful conversationalist." I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or if he really hadn't understood my look. Jason's hands danced in front of him. It was an old hunting language we'd found in a book when we were 13 years old. Warriors during the cat plague needed a way to communicate silently. Jason and I turned a fun project on a stormy night into something we shared between us. Conversations in our secret hand language saved us from many dull lectures when we were squires. "You didn't think I'd stay away when my best friend got knighted, did you?" he signed. He switched back to regular speech. "They let me come back from my pilgrimage just to sponsor you. I'm not going to waste the opportunity." Jason never passed up an opportunity to remind me that he was almost a year older and wiser in the ways of the world. Now my fingers flew. "Jason, will you keep your voice down? What if you got caught breaking the vigil?" Jason put on a fake frown and rubbed his chin. "That's a good point. Whatever knight is in charge of your vigil really should have stopped me at the door. It's shameful." He tilted his head. "One moment. They put me in charge of your vigil." He palmed his forehead. "I'm so ashamed." "So," he signed, "tradition says that the squire of Dinas wears nothing except his white robe." He undressed me with his eyes. "How traditional is my old-fashioned friend playing the game tonight?" A flutter in my gut made my breath catch. He hadn't missed it. "Yup," he signed with a wider grin. "You're definitely traditional." I tugged at my robe and glared at him. He laughed out loud. "Jason, don't you have the slightest respect for the vigil?" He laughed again. "Now that I think about it, no. I really don't. I don't think I'm doing a very good job as a guard, either. There's no telling what you'll get away with under my watch." He stepped closer, inside my reach, and his presence pressed in on me like a fire. I swallowed against a dry throat. Jason stared into my eyes. "You pray so much, and you never do anything wrong. Well, I'm not going to leave until you have at least a dozen things to pray about. Actually, does that mean we have to try a dozen different things, or just pick your favorites and start repeating?" I shot a worried look over my shoulder. The statues of the saints framed the window with sightless eyes. The stained glass windows that had painted the room with light from the daytime sun glimmered grim reflections of the aurora that half lit the night. It looked like flames guttered in the glass. Jason punched me in the arm the way he'd done 10,000 times. "What are you so worried about, Robert? They're just statues. You'd think I wanted to take you in front of St. Gavin's ghost himself." I met his eyes. "Jason, I'm glad to see you. I thought about you every night you were gone, but this is a chapel." "You've been out of Dinas before, Robert. The saints didn't descend from the stars to sit around and pray. They fell in love. They had sex. They had to, or there wouldn't even be a human race." A scowl tried to hang on my face against the sheer rush of seeing my best friend again. That's your argument? Reproduction? Do you see any problems with the biology of that argument as a seduction attempt? It started out as a rebuke, but I was grinning at the irony before I finished my point. You are going to make wonderful babies someday when you find the right person. Oh, lost my place. You are going to make wonderful babies someday when you find the right person. I'll even help you find a wife. I'm totally willing to share. Jason! Immune to my peak, he doubled over laughing. Got you. You're so easy. Talk about the saints and you get so serious. You're so caught up in legends of the past, but even the legends change. All sorts of people pray to St. Bridget these days, even people like us. We're not all sorts of people, Jason. We're Knights of Dinas, or we will be. We're supposed to live up to a higher standard than all sorts of people. You took a vow. Jason waved a hand at the fortress beyond the doors. How have you lived here all this time and stayed so naive? You've been a squire for 7 years, and still that wasn't enough to get you out of your childish idealism. You grew up in a duke's court. You should have seen the practical side of things. Life as a knight isn't about one of your stories. You want us to be a sword of justice, wander around the kingdom, righting wrongs, rescuing maidens from cat packs, and fighting with the strength of superheroes, and fighting with the strength of heroes because of our pure hearts and just causes. He stepped closer and cupped my cheek in his hand. Did it feel just to you when pages of Dinas beat you up because you were quiet and bookish? If they were right that our love is wrong, did that give them the strength of 10 when they attacked you at 3-1 in the halls? Did it feel pure that no squire or knight would come rescue you? He put a hand over my heart, and I felt my pulse hammer under his palm. He put his forehead against mine, and I trembled as he spoke. I was the one who taught you to fight, Robert. I brought you into every special lesson, shared every tutor. We were too strong together for the bullies. And I love you, Robert. I fell in love with a pretty boy who dreamed of beauty and honor in a world that shamed him over and over again. We grew up together, and I've seen it for myself. You're stronger than all the people who go out there and capture castles, braver than any wind dancer. You're stronger at heart than I've ever been. He took my hands. You captured me, and I'm yours. But you can't stay a child forever, Robert. And Dinas is important. Everyone from the king to the lowliest knight fights for the same thing, their own power and well-being. You have to understand that if you're going to keep the peace. I don't want to see your idealism get you hurt. He pointed at the dark, shimmering windows. There's a real world outside that window, and it's an ugly one. Everyone's fighting for themselves, and Dinas is the only thing that keeps them all in check. If it weren't for some honest-to-stars realism, we'd already have a civil war on our hands. King Lucas is so weak, the nobles would revolt over him alone. This close to Jason's body, I really wanted to pull him tighter and let his embrace chase all those worries away for a night. Instead, I pulled away until his hands rested on my shoulders and I had room to sign. That's treason, Jason. No, Robert, it's the truth. And Dinas is behind the times. We live by a code that's a century behind the rest of the kingdom. It doesn't matter. You're going to be out there soon on your pilgrimage, and then on your own assignments. When we're out there, we can be together. The rest of the world isn't going to care as long as we don't make a big deal about it. We don't have to sneak around anymore. Oh, out there, I can have you forever, instead of stealing nights here and there. Jason, this is Dinas, not the duchies. We're a different kind of order. The duchies look to us. The people support us with their donations. We're the hope they look to. No matter how bad things get, they trust that there will be someone between them and the darkness. I love you, Jason. Oh, stars, I love you, but I love Dinas too. I waved a hand at the fortress beyond the chapel door. I used to hate it here. When I met you, and you showed me that there was something worthwhile. You loved it here, and I loved your childhood home. I soaked it in all those years when we learned and trained together, and I don't care if the duchies don't believe in the saints anymore. I can't control the duchies. I can still choose what I will honor. It seems to me that if more knights thought of the saints and the stars, then this world would be a better place. That's the reason we exist, Jason, to make this world a better place. I don't understand you sometimes. You hold such a high standard, but you don't live up to it. Why do you stay trapped in between? The standard isn't wrong just because I can't live up to it. It gives me something to rise to meet. Even if life would be easier out there, we can't have that without giving up who we are. You're the heir to Dinas. Your father needs your help to hold the kingdoms together. I swallowed. And because you're here, I can't ever leave. Jason waved the idea away. I didn't spend 7 days in the saddle to get here and butt heads on the same topics all over again. I'm nearly done with my pilgrim year, but yours starts tomorrow. Jason snorted. 12 months with no job description but to wander the duchies, learning the land and doing good. You're going to love it. You are. Look at your grin. I didn't try to deny it. It's going to be amazing. Well, it may be amazing, but I reserve the right to be bitter. It was hard enough to leave on my own pilgrimage. I can go without you for 20 months or 12. Guess which one I choose? That lit a fire in more places than my gut. He wasn't the only one who'd had a hard time being apart, but saints' statues still stared down at my back. Jason, it's against the code. We could get kicked out of Dinas. That didn't stop you when you were 13, and it isn't going to stop me now. You planned all this out, didn't you? Jason shrugged without a trace of shame. I love you, Robert. I've moved the shifting skies to be here tonight. A shadow passed behind those rich brown eyes, an emotion that could almost be fear. But if you don't want me anymore, I'm not going to force you. The fear melted into a slight edge of anger that tightened his voice. I'll go stand guard, and you can have your perfect proper vigil without me. He walked to the open doors and closed them, but he didn't walk through. My arms ached where I'd felt him just a minute ago. My back tensed where I felt the stares of the saints. Jason was right about me in more ways than one. I really believed in the saints, in the code of Dinas. When I was 13 and Jason became my friend and Dinas transformed around me, suddenly there was someone who wanted me around, who made time for me. Color and joy flowed back into my world like sunrise for the first time since the twilight of my mother's death. The bullying stopped when Jason and I stood up together. I got into trouble alongside him for the first time, often, but my studies more than made up for it. I actually cared about life again, and Jason was there, always there, to get me out of trouble once more. A few months later, when Jason asked for more than friendship, I agreed. Those nights together filled the hollow inside me like nothing else in life. It wasn't just the sex. It was companionship, acceptance, pride, confidence, and vulnerability to the first man in my life who didn't offer me hurt in return. To be wanted, to be needed, loved, to have a set of human eyes and hands reach out to me because I was enough when all the other boys said I was worthless. Then add the sex. Apocalyptic sex. Jason discovered my body at the same time I did, and we knew everything about the other. I didn't just miss it, I resonated with a need for it, from my eyeballs to my bones. On those stolen nights, I felt like a man who took his first breath after a year buried alive. And if I still believed in the saints, still felt something wrong about what I did, even if I couldn't ever quit. If I cried myself to sleep sometime while Jason held me, well, that was the price I paid. It wasn't a perfect life, but Jason loved me. Jason wanted me, and he was here, which was more than anyone else had been in all my life. I looked over at the altar to the statues of the saints and offered up the silent prayer of apology. Forgive me, but he's all I have. Jason, I whispered out loud, and the whisper reverberated in my bones. It was the sound of my shattered vows. Guilt and shame filled me, but I knew that a minute in Jason's arms would chase those feelings away. For the night, which was the best I was ever going to find in this life. Jason turned to face me at the door. His breath was as fast as mine, but I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. Jason, I repeated as I pulled my robe over my head. Stay. He locked the doors and came to me, and the rest was for us alone. The chapel doors slammed open again. They shattered my dreams like a hammer. I jerked awake, mind reeling. Jason had thrown about half the cushions in the small chapel together for a bed. The slow-burning candles were dimmer in the first glimmers of twilight before the dawn. I had fallen asleep. Father stood framed in the doorway. Torches burned in the hallway behind him, guttering and red as his rage. His eyes were wide. His hands trembled at his sides. Pale splotches on his cheeks faded as the rest of his face turned bright red. No. No, 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 no. My father's eyes looked at me, and Jason sprawled next to me. Father! I scrambled for my robe, tripped on Jason's leg, and fell to the ground naked in front of my father. Father's hand clenched on his sword. No sound came from his trembling mouth. I pulled the treasonous robe over my head and started for the door. Father, listen to me. I can explain. The Duke of Grey Mountain stepped a single pace into the room. So, now I know why you have never taken your leaves at home. The disgusted words were written on nails stabbed into my heart. Father, it isn't like that. He didn't strike me. He didn't need to. How could someone who wanted nothing to do with me reach across all that distance and hurt me as if I'd never been away? Don't you call me that! The Duke bared a decimeter of sword, the swordsman's formal warning before blood flowed. Don't ever call me that again, boy. No son of mine could ever. The red on his face turned purple. I'm glad your mother lies in her grave. I pray she was wrong about your precious saints, Robert. I don't want to think that she could see you now. I'm glad she never lived to see the thing her son has become. I used to think that my father had already given me every wound possible years ago. He just proved me wrong. I had to try and force words past the knot in my throat, and the room's candles danced in my tears. I hit my shin on a pew racing forward, but the larger pain swallowed that lesser hurt without dimming. I felt like I was dying. Father, I said, please. He did strike me then, for the first time in all my life. Father was smaller than me, but he had his whole body behind the blow. Stars flashed behind my eyes. I felt cold flagstones beneath my chin, but I couldn't remember falling. Don't make familiar with me, boy, Father snarled. I have no medel son. The word meant soft in my mother's language, the one I hadn't heard on Father's lips since the day she died. The pain in my heart redoubled. I curled up around it and tried to gather breath to cry. My father spat on the ground next to my face and spun in place. I couldn't stop him as he walked away, and I didn't resist when he summoned the guards.